we have the most awaited section. I'm very happy to introduce our resource person, Dr. Johnny Johnson, Professor, School of Business and Management Studies, MG University, Kottayam. He is acting as Director, KN Raj Study Center for Planning, Coordinator, Training and Placement Cell, Mahatma Gandhi University. He has an industrial experience of 6 years and teaching experience of 17 years. In his credit, he has a large number of publications, books, and produced 6 PhDs. He is an apt person to deal with the topic identification of research problem. Now, over to you, sir, please.
A very good afternoon to all of you. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So, His Grace Thomas Martitos Episcopa, the Chief Manager of Mahatma College, Chungatara, the Manager, Matai Joseph Father, Principal of the College, the Head of the Department, Mr. Rajiv Thomas, and all the participants who are here. And most importantly, I should make a mention of the Chief Guest of today, Professor Nasser. To start from where he has actually started this session, let me first, I was really impressed by the way he started off his inaugural speech. Now, any research for that matter, the first question which normally people tend to ask is, what is research? Why is research necessary? So I start from there. I believe that research is something which is common to every human being. Some may do it in a very organized manner, some does it in a very unorganized manner. But if you see, the success of an individual lies in how best he can do his research. Now, we in colleges and universities, we consider research to be a part of a job. But does it mean that others are not doing research? No. Everybody is involved in some sort of a research. You ask a shopkeeper, you ask a common man, you ask a small child. He is always searching for new knowledge. Now, searching for new knowledge, repeatedly searching for new things to know, it is also one type of research. But if you see, the most successful people always happen to be those who have done this search in a very systematic manner. One is systematic. Why we call it a systematic? Because any good research should be scientifically proven and authenticated. So that is one important thing. So it has to be a very systematic study which is to be carried out. And that is what, as professionals, we tend to practice, we tend to teach the research scholars, and that is how we undertake our research process. So that is why, how to do a scientific search, we need to have some knowledge about that. I've been seeing a lot of researchers who come for research as the bishop has already told, Thomas Martitos Episcopa, Tirumeni has already told, some people do it for the sake of doing some research, for the sake of getting a PhD degree or a doctorate. Now that is something which has to be totally stopped. We always need to do research because it should be some part of our job. It should be a passion. There should be a passion for research. There should be an inquisitive mind. I always say an inquisitive mind which should be there in every individual. Unless otherwise, you have an inquisitive mind, you will never be able to search for new knowledge. So there is a general practice which normally universities follow. Whenever research scholars enroll for or maybe seek admissions for PhD, we always look at the research aptitude of a scholar. Now, what is being tested in the research aptitude? Most often research scholars don't know what is research aptitude. Research aptitude, normally a good professor or a good supervisor always looks into the candidate, whether he has got the thirst for knowing something. And that is what I normally call it as an inquisitive mind. Thirst for new knowledge. Now this thirst for new knowledge has to be there in every individual. Because research is not conducted or not carried out for the sake of doing research. It is to really improvise our personality, improvise our knowledge, improvise the way in which we transact with various people, because the more knowledge we have, it will enable us to have a good transaction with individuals. So first is an inquisitive mind. That is very, very essential for any research scholar. Second is, now inquisitive mind alone is not sufficient. To go into because research is nothing but getting into the truth of a particular problem, knowing the truth. Now, I've seen some research scholars who undertake the research. They do have the thirst for knowledge, but the similar passion for knowledge, passion in the sense to seek the ultimate truth, that is not there in some individuals. A good researcher, along with having a good inquisitive mind, he or she will always have the passion for knowing the truth. Now, knowing the truth is not that easy. We always get a lot of information through social media, through our various media sources, from televisions, from various of those sources. 90%, at least 90% of us really rely on these things which we receive. A few percentage of people normally try to question whether the information which is passed down to me is really a genuine information or whether it is a reliable information. Now that is where, that again is a quality of a good researcher. A good researcher always looks into everything which he receives, every data, every information which he receives, and sees that whether the knowledge or the information which he gets is true or not. So these two things are very, very important for a good researcher. A very inquisitive mind, and the second one is the ultimate passion to know the truth. Now I start from there. Now, coming to a good research, what are the qualities of a good research? We all have studied, we all have been teaching in various colleges and universities as to what is a good research. We say a good research has to be scientific in nature. Now, what is this scientific in nature? The scientific nature of a study comes from following a very good methodology for the study. Scientific is nothing but a good methodology. Methodology, what means what? Now, the methods which you employ in your research, starting from whether you have followed the various steps in research in a very systematic, in a very well-informed manner. Now, I'm just getting to these steps there. So we all have studied and we all propagate or teach in various colleges and universities that research has got few steps. I start from there. And the first step we always say is identification of a research problem. Now, identification of a research problem followed by designing, having a good design for your research. Then we say, we look into the data, sources of data, and what type of data are we collecting from various sources. Then we say, what is the methods, what are the various methods we employ in actually analyzing this data to come to a meaningful conclusion. And then how the findings or the analysis are converted into a thesis format. That is, these are the various steps which we follow. But the most important step in research is identifying the real problem. Now, this is a very difficult task. Now, most often people think that research means, okay, problems will be plentifully available. You can just pick up any problem and problem is given the least importance. Now, that is a very dangerous thing. I can give you umpteen number of examples wherein researchers have started their research work. After having started the research work, midway through or after completing 2 or 3 years, finally, when they start knowing what research is all about, they come and say, "Sir, I think there is a problem with my research problem. There is a problem with my research, the research problem itself." So that's when they say that it has not been framed properly. There is some problem there. I'm unable to get the exact data which is required. Now that's when he realizes the research problem was not properly taken. Now, research problem identification is the most difficult and the most important step in research. Can it be done easily? The next question. No. It requires a lot of effort, lot of pain. Now, when I say pain, it requires a lot of hard work. Now, what is this hard work? It's, people say, research problem, we got various types of research. One is generic research problems. Generic research problems are the ones which we see around us. Around us, we see a lot of problems. If you take the case of social sciences, we have got a lot of problems which we see in our surroundings. We can pick up some of these problems and we can just see why it is happening. Problems related to human behavior. So we can study that. So we can just go into in depth and see, because we can find the problems existing everywhere. That is when it comes to social sciences or some other field. On the contrary, when we look at science subjects, research problems are not very much generic. It is much more which is required from maybe various other sources. So the source of a research problem are many. It may be generic problem, it may be from wide reading, it may be from discussing with various experts, it may be from discussing with maybe teachers, fellow colleagues, fellow friends. But that is just the starting point of trying to know the problem. That need not be your research problem. That is just a starting point. Starting point that there exists a problem. Now, the moment you see that there exists a problem, we are not supposed to see that to be the real problem and start the studies. No. It's something more difficult and more meticulously to be planned. Now, I just give you a few examples because I undertake a lot of research in the area of marketing and the area of human resource management. I've seen a lot of research scholars approaching me for a PhD work. They come and ask me, sir, I want to enroll as a researcher under me. So what I do normally is, I normally don't select a candidate immediately when they come to me asking for a research, because most of the research scholars, they straight away come to you looking for your guideship without even having a concrete problem with them or a concrete idea about what research is actually. Now, normal tendency is that whoever comes to me for research guidance, the first thing which I do is I discuss with them briefly for a few minutes. I ask them just to see whether the research scholar has got some aptitude or not. That is his inquisitive mind. Some few questions in the area in which he is likely to do the research. Then I ask him. With the few questions itself, you come to know whether the person is really having some inquisitive mind, the thirst for knowledge or not. After that, immediately, what I do is I ask him to select few articles. If possible, I will select few articles and give it to him in his area of interest, maybe one or two articles, and say, please read these articles thoroughly, and then come to me for a discussion. That is just to know whether he is able to read an article in his field or in his area of interest, and whether he is able to make out what that article is speaking, what is the objective of that article, what is the methodology, how they have done it. So just to ask him. Now, if I find in my second meeting that the candidate has come to me with some sufficiently decent answers to that particular article, then I consider him to be really qualified. Maybe I'll just think about taking him under my guidance. So that is the thing. Now, here the most important thing is that the first thing which is telling is, when you pick up an article, I want you first to identify what is the problem being investigated by the researcher there. I give him a few titles. The few titles which I ask him to complete and bring is, one is to identify the research problem. Then I say, please find out the methodology what is employed by that researcher in that article. Third is, how did that researcher analyze those articles in that research? Fourth, what are the conclusions drawn by them? And in what limitations did that researcher do his research? This much I'll ask. So this is how I start my guidance to a research fellow. Now, coming back to the topic, that is identification of the research problem. Most often, researchers, when they come to me after having read this, They normally pick up the mere objectives, what is mentioned in that particular article. Because in some articles, the objectives are mentioned very clearly. So they bring the objectives and say, this is the objective which has been done. So I ask them further, why did he choose these objectives? What was his larger idea, larger objective? Because articles don't give you or tell you what is the real problem which they have done, because you have to understand. There has to be better understanding by the researcher as to what was the real problem based on which the researcher has formulated these objectives. So I go a bit deeper, and then the researcher and the research scholar understand that yes, research objectives are not research problems. Now, this again is a confusion which most often we find in researchers. They consider research objectives to be research problems. No, research problems is actually the starting point. Once we understand we have a research problem with us, then what we do is we try to bring, to fulfill those, to come to the answers to that research problem. What we do is we formulate specific objectives. Specific objectives. So if we have a research problem, to fulfill that research problem, probably I'll be having 2 or 3 or 4 objectives. And I know that once I fulfill these objectives, if you're able to fulfill these specific objectives, I am able to answer my research question. Now that is how you draw it. So which means again, a research, once you identify the research problem, your research problem is followed by a in-depth reading or in-depth analysis, not analysis, in-depth reading of literature. I again come back to how to get a research problem. In research problem, normally, my way of doing research, because you find a lot of literature available in this area, a lot of books, but nowhere it really gives you a specific way of actually coming to a research problem. My way of identifying the research problem, and which I advocate to my students, is if you have a research aptitude, if you have a broad research problem, broad research area in your mind, what you should normally do is, definitely some questions will be there. If, for example, if I'm planning to do a research in the area of marketing, I will have some specific questions, specific areas in marketing which I want to explore. And in that also I may have specific. Marketing means I may choose branding, for example. In branding, I may come to some specific areas of brands, maybe to study some brand equity, maybe to understand the relationship between brand equity and its performance, or maybe brand equity and the popularity of the brand. Something like some research, some vague questions will be there in my mind. I will ask them to, if the vague questions are developed in your mind, then what you should do is pick up literature in that area. Pick up the literatures in that area. Start reading articles related to that vague idea area. That is brand equity, brand performance, maybe brand preference, all this area I ask them to read. Now, in the process of reading, what actually you're doing is, you are reviewing the literature. People often, again, reviewing literature is not understood properly. Some people think that I choose a topic, and then I go pick up a few literature. Maybe some of them, what the normally easy way of doing is look into the review of literature chapter of some of the theses, pick straight from that thesis and say, I have also done my literature review. That's not the way to be done. From your vague idea, once you have a vague idea, you normally pick up all articles in that vague idea, read them thoroughly. The more you read, the more knowledge you are gaining. And what is important is while reading, I always tell them, if you find these articles are nearing your basic vague idea which you have developed, please maintain a notebook. Write down all these articles one by one. Look into that. What was the problem which that article has addressed? One. Second, what is the methodology that that researcher has employed in that research article? Third, what was his type of analysis? And what are the conclusions drawn? Now, this is the most enriching part of research. This is actually, I call this is the actual research. Reviewing of literature is the main soul of the research. If you're able to review literature thoroughly, what happens is you have gained sufficient knowledge in that area. You have understood how various researchers in that area, that topic, has done the research first. What are the problems they have addressed? What are the methodologies they have formulated? What type of analysis they have done? What are the various conclusions which we could draw? Now, when I say conclusions, why all these things are required is, the more you read in that area, you gain sufficient knowledge. One, second, you also try to establish relationship between various variables. You say which otherwise we call it as, you can formulate few hypotheses for your study. Now, also everything is addressed when you do the review of literature. So if you're able to do this review of literature, then you know what are the knowledge which has already been developed, already been explored. So in reviewing more number of literatures, you know what is the extent of research which has been carried out in your vague area, which I initially said, in your vague area. What is the extent of research which has been done? Now you know what more is required. Now that's why I say, from your vague area, you get an idea about what is the extent of research which has been done in that vague area, plus you also get some idea as to what more is required, which in research parlance, we call it as research gap. Now, this is called as identification of the research gap. So the more from the vague area you have read widely, you have gained sufficient knowledge, and later from that, you have come to know what more is required, and you have seen that you have come to the research gap. Now, this is how you have come to research. From the research gap, which means I am supposed to explore more. The gap is identified now. From the research gap, I come to my research problem. My research problem is the gap which I've identified. The research problem is taken from there. Once you have identified your research problem, now, that is not, because along with identifying the research problem comes various other things. What are they? Once your research problem is identified, now you come to how to fulfill this research problem, or how to address this problem. To address this problem, we convert or we formulate few specific objectives related to this research problem. And we know if you're able to fulfill the specific objectives, I'll be able to address my research problem. No, that is all. Along with that, we also, since we have read widely, we have reviewed sufficient literature, we know that there are certain conclusions also we could draw, which we otherwise call it as hypothesis. Hypothesis in simple term is called, it is an assumption which is yet to be proved. This is one way of defining hypothesis. It's an assumption which is yet to be proved, but it's not purely an assumption. It is an assumption or the conclusions which you draw after having widely searched for something. So it is not merely an assumption. It is something which is established. Only thing is that you have to prove for your study. So hypothesis is developed. You come to a few hypotheses. The other way of defining hypothesis is the hypothesis. In some books, it says hypothesis is the tentative solution to the research problem. Yes, it is a tentative solution to your research problem, which means for every specific objective which you have formulated, you have some hypothesis. It means by looking into the hypothesis, you can easily address or fulfill your objectives, because it is a possible solution to your research problem. So, along with identification of the research problem, you should know how to translate that research problem into specific objectives. Along with specific objectives, you also should know what are the various hypotheses which are to be formulated, or which are there existing for each of these specific objectives. Once you come to your hypothesis, then the next thing is that often people come and ask this question, sir, I have formulated few hypotheses. I have formulated my objective. Research problem is there. Objective is also specified. And I have a few hypotheses also. What I should do next? Now, a research scholar who has undertaken the initial few steps in a very systematic manner, I would say, doesn't require any further guidance, because that research scholar has already fallen into the groove of research. How? Because I've told you, from your vague problem identification, you have gone for literature review, extensive research of literature, you identified the gap. From the gap, you have come to a specific problem, come to the identification of the problem. From the problem, you have translated that to specific objectives. You also have established few hypotheses now. Now, if somebody comes after that and asks, sir, what is to be done next? What is to be done next? In the course of reviewing the literature, you have read widely, you know what are the various variables which are to be considered for this study. There is nobody else should come and give you this any further idea. Because since you have read thoroughly, since you have taken the research problem that way, you have also identified the important variables from the literature which you have read. So the variables are identified. Now, all you need to do is, you need to ask or explore or collect data with respect to these variables, which means preparing a questionnaire or preparing a tool for research. For preparing a tool for research, you will pick up these variables and then start studying. So your formulation of the questionnaire or questionnaire in commerce, so that also comes from the literature review. You identify the variables, and from the variables you need to design few questions, which after which only you can collect the data. So that is the process. So the questionnaire becomes ready. From the questionnaire, what happens is, now the next question, you go for collection of data. You collect the data. After having collected the data, what is to be done next? The researcher again comes back and say, sir, I've collected the data. Please tell me, how do I analyze it? Now, do you think answer is required from, or research supervisor should answer this question? I would say, if the researcher has thoroughly read or maybe reviewed the literature in a systematic manner, this again is not required, because while reviewing literature, while reading the articles, the researcher would have come to know how other researchers in the reviews must have analyzed these data. So, with respect to analyzing the data, with respect to the tools employed in analyzing the data or statistical tools employed, that also actually comes from your reviews. Now, there are cases wherein, in spite of reading thoroughly, trying to take some of the tools which others have employed, some research supervisors also advocate doing something more than what has been done by other researchers. For that, definitely, you need to seek the guidance from your supervisors. But otherwise, know how to do a research analysis, or what are the statistical tools to be employed in research analysis, you yourself could identify from the reviews. That is what I'm trying to draw. Now, so that is, I'm just given a brief idea about how we normally undertake a research, starting from identification of the research problem till the completion of the research. Because once you analyze the data, you need to draw inferences from the analysis. Because all these areas are going to be dealt by the experts who are likely to come in the next few days. Now, in the process of doing all these things, there is one important step which most of the experts or most of the teachers never actually ask the research scholars to do, and that is, after having collected the data from the market or after having done the survey or whatever, normally that there is a tendency to send these data or to the person who is going to analyze data, or you may start doing straight away doing the analysis. Now that is the wrong thing. Now, once you have collected the data, there is an important step which every researcher should do, which is nothing but the cleaning of data. The cleaning of data means you have to see whether the data which you have collected, has been collected, is the right data. How do you know that? Well, you should check whether the questionnaire is properly filled up, whether the tool which are employed, the instrument which are employed for your research, whether it has captured the information, the data which you really wanted. So that is what is to be done. And only those instrument which is collected the data which you actually required, only those need to be taken for your analysis. Otherwise, what happens is you may end up coming to wrong conclusions. So which again need to be avoided. So that is a very, very important step, which most of us may not be doing, and most of the research supervisors also don't ask the research. Because in today's world, why I'm saying this is very important, because in today's world, most of the analysis, we employ a lot of good analytical tools. Like when it comes to studies related to causal studies, cause and effect studies, most of us employ the statistical tool called as the structured equation modeling, SEM. Now in SEM, what happens is at every stage you need to check the reliability of the data. Now what happens if you don't do this cleaning properly, and if you don't check whether the data which you have captured is actually the data which is required for your study. If your data tool has not captured, if the instrument has not captured the actual data, what happens is you may have problems in the structural equation modeling, or maybe in some other analysis technique. So it is very, very important that all of us, whenever we do go for analysis, before that we look into the cleaning of the data. So that is in brief. I've just given some idea about that. So because since this is not an interactive class, what happens is since I'm speaking alone, monotonous, I just wanted a feedback from maybe some of the participants who are here listening to me, whether you are clear with whatever I have spoken so far. I want some responses, please.
Yes, sir, following.
Yeah, are you able to follow, or are you able to understand what I'm just speaking so far I've spoken? Okay, so yeah, I hope all of you are there, because since none of you are there on the videos, what happens is it becomes very difficult for me to really gauge whether you are with me in this particular area, right? So yes, now I have got a small presentation PPT with me, which I thought I will share now. PPT with me. I'll just, in this particular area, I've just designed a small PPT, not very big. So I'll just upload that PPT. Will it be okay? Hello? Hello?
Sir, not visible, sir.
It's not visible. So I require, one second, let me see that. I'm just trying to upload, but there's nobody to.
So you may have to share the slide.
I may have to share this slide.
Yeah.
No, I am just, I've gone to the present now.
If you're presenting now, I think sharing is better than uploading. I think so. Usually we say share the slide.
One second.
Oh.
I'm unable to do that. So that is one problem.
So maybe the organizer.
Yeah, somebody should come. Okay. I think there is nobody to help me. So anyway, so.
So is there a button?
I've just taken the.
Present now is there. Present now button at the bottom, at the right.
I've taken the present now button, and it shows, it gives me 3 tabs. Like one is your entire screen, your window, or a Chrome tab.
Yeah.
So
Use window option, sir. Use window option.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Hello.
Window.
Yeah. Window
Sir,
option.
you have an option to select a window, right?
Yes.
You can select the PowerPoint page of. Yeah.
Yeah, I've taken that. Okay, I've got it now.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, sir.
Okay. This will work, sir.
There is
Is
slideshow.
it
Yes,
okay
sir,
now?
it is
Is
visible. It is visible.
it visible, right?
It's okay now.
Yeah. It's
Yeah, visible, sir.
It's visible.
It's visible.
There is
Okay.
slideshow
So-
option also.
So in
You can use slideshow option also.
I can put slideshow option. Okay.
Try pressing the function key 5, sir. F5.
Is it okay now?
It's okay now. Yeah,
Yeah.
correct, sir.
Okay.
Come.
Yeah, okay.
You are
No, sir.
So
correct.
yeah. So I just because in order to I'll go to these the things which I've already given a general idea about social sciences research and what are the steps which are involved. So again, you can just go through the titles which I've given here. Define importance of defining a problem, all these things. I've told you the tasks involved in problem definition or problem identification is discussions with decision makers, interview with industry experts in social sciences, secondary data analysis, and qualitative research. The various, because in marketing we employ all these steps in management research. Now I'll give you a small, this is something which is normally seen. An example which I'm just quoting. One day I received a phone call from a research analyst who introduced himself as one of alumni. He was working in the restaurant chain in town and wanted to help analyzing the data he had collected while conducting a research study. When we met, he presented me with a copy of the questionnaire and asked how he should analyze the data. Now, this is normally a practice which we see in most of the researchers. They say they have collected the data, they present, then they go to the a person who analyzes data and gives a questionnaire and say, this is what I've done. So what happens here is, the first question which probably a good analyzer, a good analyst or a person who is good in analysis, he does is, he immediately will ask the question, what is the real problem which is being addressed? Now, why this question is important? Most often, whenever we go into a research, we follow the steps of research without fulfilling the first step, which is understanding the problem which is to be addressed. So the next thing is, when he looked perplexed, because after me questioning, when he looked perplexed, I explained that data analysis is not an independent exercise. Rather, the goal of data analysis is to provide information related to the problem components. This is a very common phenomena which we normally see. Then he says, I was surprised to learn that he did not have a clear understanding of the research problem and that a written definition did not exist. So before going any further, he says he had to define the research problem. Once that was done, it was found that much of the data collected was not relevant to the problem. So what happens now is the whole exercise becomes a waste of time and resources. So the study needs to be conducted right from scratch. Now, this is a common phenomenon which we normally see in social sciences. I don't know in basic sciences or pure sciences, I don't know whether this exists, but in social sciences, most often this is very much seen. So to define, as I told you, to define the research problem, there are various tasks which I told you. I told you a method which normally I employ. Now this is it. Of course, it is covered under this broad structure which I just put here. It says the task involved include discussion with various decision makers, interviews with experts, secondary data analysis, and qualitative research. Now the secondary data analysis is nothing but your literature review. Here, it is literature review, because whatever literature which you are reading is all secondary in nature. It is not the primary data which you are doing. It is all secondary in nature. So everything is studied, you're doing. So everything is covered there. So from there you come to the environmental context of the problem. You are able to define your problem. So because when it comes to marketing, we say, I've given an example of marketing. Marketing, we say, normally, there are two types of problem which exist in business organizations. One is a management problem. The other one is a real specific problem related to the function. Here I put it as marketing problem. I'll give a small example. An example which I could give is, when I say what is a management problem, in an organization, in a business organization, probably they face a crisis situation wherein they see that their products are not getting sold. Now, products not getting sold is a major problem. Now, the organization wants to understand or do a research and find out what is to be done to address this particular problem. Now, a researcher comes forward and he is asked to fulfill the research. What is the problem he will choose? Now, immediately somebody says the problem is there already. The problem is poor sales. Now, is that the real problem? Now comes the question. That is not the real problem. The real research problem is not poor sales. Now, what is it then? That is a management decision problem. Poor sales is a management decision problem. And what is a marketing research problem? The marketing research problem is slightly different. Marketing research problem is, see, a product sale is not happening. So what is to be investigated? What is to be investigated is whether this product, whether it has got the necessary requirements as perceived by the consumer. Because in that same category, some other product would be selling. But this product is not getting sold, which means the marketing problem only, whether the customer's preferences are met in this particular product, whether the pricing of this particular product is proper, whether the distribution network adopted by the product, this particular product, whether it is sufficient to have sufficient reach. Now, these are all specific marketing problems. Now, so the research problem, management problem is totally different, and your research problem is totally different. Now, this is what I'm saying. Similarly, the same thing happens in the area of finance or in the area of HR. So in management sciences or in commerce, normally we have this particular issue because we all often take a management problem as a research problem and start doing the research, which may lead to a lot of other difficulties later on. Later on, in the midway through the research, we understand that the problem is not this. Problem should have been investigated. Because the more you're specific with your research problem, it becomes very clear, your methodology, your instrument, everything you can choose very wisely. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult. Now, approach to the problem. Of course, as I said, whenever a problem has been found, you need to really go for wide reading. Now, wide reading means you have to understand it thoroughly, what the real problem, how it has arisen. And you also, after having read, you lay down some theoretical foundations, or we call it as theoretical model. You need to have some draw the specific objective and draw some theoretical foundations for that particular problem, which is nothing but identification of variables for that particular problem. This looking into the connection between these variables. We say theoretical model. When you see, we try to connect the variables in such a manner that it forms a particular theoretical model. So that is how you approach a particular problem. So it can be various methods are there. There can be graphical methods, mathematical models can be drawn, verbal models can be run. Just by having an arrow mark, you can see this is connected to this. This leads to this leads to this. You can create the theoretical model, and from that you ask the real research questions. So once it is a model is developed, you can specifically address how it is happening. What is research questions you just formulate? As I said, along with that comes your hypothesis, and next one is what are the specific information which is required. So I'm just summing up whatever I've said earlier. I've just listed out the various steps which I said, but the step which this is how it has to be scientifically drawn. Now, this particular picture, normally I demonstrate in the classroom whenever I'm just discussing marketing research. Because since I'm dealing with marketing research, I thought this is very appropriate. Even in spite of me telling you all these things, you should know this is the real approach whenever you undertake a particular study. Of course, this is followed by your research design, which is going to be addressed tomorrow. So I'm just giving an idea till here. Then, of course, I know I need not explain these things to you. So, okay. This PPT, if I want, I can just share with you. I don't want to really discuss in detail because I've given a brief idea about what are the steps, how a research problem is to be undertaken, how the specific objectives are formulated. From the objectives, how a hypothesis is actually identified, hypothesis. And now, again, I would use this occasion to actually speak something more about hypothesis. Now, this is every researcher who undertakes research need to have a good idea about what is hypothesis. I've been asking researchers to when I ask a question, how do you define a hypothesis? The first thing which comes to answer which comes to me is, sir, hypothesis is nothing but an assumption. Now then I ask, is it purely an assumption? Then he says, no, sir, an assumption. Yeah, it is. Is it purely an assumption? It need not be purely an assumption. It is something which we observe, which you find to be true. But only thing is that it is an assumption which you find to be true, but you are not able to establish it, and for which you want to test. That is how you have to define. So hypothesis is something which you absorb around you, or you read in some various literatures, but you're unable to prove it. So that is why we say hypothesis. Whenever we state a hypothesis in social science, it always happens to be your research hypothesis always happens to be your alternate hypothesis. Any hypothesis which is stated in social sciences always happen to be your alternate hypothesis. So we immediately state a null hypothesis. Null hypothesis is whatever hypothesis you have stated, you nullify it. You write a negative statement to that, and then you do the analysis or research. What happens is, ideally speaking, when you started your research, you started with a hypothesis. Why did you start with a hypothesis? Because after having read various information, you are able to establish that this is true. That is the hypothesis. Now, in research, again, you want to prove that this is true from your research. So what you do is you first nullify it. That is, you set a null hypothesis. So ideally speaking, what should happen to your null hypothesis? Ideally speaking, your null hypothesis should get rejected. Ideally speaking. But there are situations wherein your null hypothesis may not get rejected. Why I'm saying your null hypothesis should get rejected ideally? Because your alternate hypothesis should be true, which is nothing but your research hypothesis. So if you are not able to prove your hypothesis to be true, that means whatever conclusions you have drawn from your initial observations, from your initial reading, there comes a big question mark. So that is why, ideally speaking, your null hypothesis has to be rejected. But there are situations wherein null hypothesis may not get rejected. Like if you have chosen a wrong data, wrong respondent, if your sample is small. So there are situations which can come. So whenever we write down the results of hypothesis testing, even if our null hypothesis is not getting rejected, we don't say that we accept the null hypothesis. The wording we never use, accepting null hypothesis. Ideally speaking, what we should write is, we don't have sufficient evidence to reject null hypothesis. That's the way in which we need to approach this particular issue. Yeah. So I'm not taking much of the time. So I think I've addressed to whatever important was there. So I'll share this particular slide because taking a presentation using slide I am not used to, but I do have a slide with me so that if I can pass it on to you, Meanwhile, I would request for any questions from the audience if they want any specific clarifications or so. Is there, can you people hear me, please? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Sir,
please, because, yeah, please.
yeah. So there's a question from Neeta Kumari. She's
Yeah.
asking, sir, kindly please suggest what topics can be taken in present scenario, if you can please.
See, I don't know which, I can definitely, because I understand the problem, because probably he's a person is a research scholar, new research scholar. See, ideally, as I told you, I started my topic by saying that, first of all, you need to have passion for research. I think Professor Nasser also has said the same thing, a passion for research. Research start from inquisitive of mind. You need to have an inquisitive mind, thirst for knowledge. So when you have thirst for knowledge, you make keen observations around you, you identify which is a broad area or which is the area of research to your liking. From that area, you come to a research problem. So, to asking for a topic to be researched, asking for an area to be researched, ideally, I don't recommend, because I do have my research area, I can just speak, but I can't specify this particular research area, please undertake a particular research. Whenever research scholars come to me and ask this question, I'll say, I can definitely suggest some of the areas of research in my area. So would you be interested in that area is a different question. So ideally speaking, I don't wish to really suggest something here, because it has to stem from that person's area of interest, not my area of interest. My area of interest, as far as as research is concerned, my area of interest is areas related to consumer behavior, areas related to consumer psychology, and areas related to brand equity and brand performance. So if I suggest an area from these areas, it may not be ideally suited for the other candidate. So that is my answer to that candidate. So please choose your area of interest, and from that area of interest, what you should do is you should start reading. You should start reading and trying to understand the important, probably the problems which exist in that area. And from there, you have to start addressing the problem.
Okay, sir. Another question in chat box is, what is the difference between a research question and a hypothesis? Which one is good or both are needed?
I don't know. See, I've told you, research question means is a starting point of research. Research question is the starting point of research. You identify a research problem. As we said, identification of research problem. It is a starting point of research. Once you have identified a research problem, what happens is you also, in the process of identifying the research, you further go for literature review or review of literature extensively. You try to understand it better. In the understanding of that, you come to some hypothesis. Now, hypothesis, I say again, I'm coming. What is hypothesis? Hypotheses are certain conclusions which a researcher draws before starting the research. Before starting the research itself, the researcher comes to certain conclusions, which is stated in his research as hypothesis, but which is not established still. So, in order to establish that this hypothesis is true, he or she goes for a testing of hypothesis. I can give a very simple example here. I want to undertake a study to understand the intelligence level of students in my class. Now, intelligence level of students in my class. Now, or maybe intelligence level of students, maybe in a school or whatever. So here, what are the common, what do you say, hypotheses which people come to draw here? Is there any specific conclusion which can draw? I mean, normally a researcher starts, but still, in order to find some conclusion, some may say that, okay, boys happen to be more intelligent when it comes to quantitative attitudes. Girls happen to be more intelligent when it comes to communication or maybe language subjects, or maybe more efficient when it comes to language subjects. Now, these are some of the observations which cannot be proven, but we can definitely, from within the knowledge level, we can definitely state that as an hypothesis and test whether it is true or not. But it has to be linked to that. So, to say, definitely hypothesis and research question are two different things. From the research question, after having taken the research question, after having explored it further, then you come and establish for hypothesis. Hypothesis, again, you state a hypothesis for your research objective. As I said, I want to know the intelligence level. I want to know, if my objective is to see whether, to understand the intelligence level across, sex, across age. So what happens across age? So here, I can draw one of the hypotheses saying that maybe students having more age, or students who are elderly students, have better intelligence than younger students. Now that is a conclusion, or maybe which I draw before the research itself. I state that as a hypothesis, and then I try to study that for my sample or for my population which I'm studying, and then see whether it is true or not. Now this is how I establish a hypothesis. So these two things are totally different. Yeah, is it okay? Sufficient?
Okay, sir. Another question.
Hello, sir.
Okay, ask.
Yeah.
So this is way out from the research area.
Yeah.
What I'm asking is, you said when you release a product into the market, you'll
Yeah.
have a market survey.
Yeah.
But still, sometimes the product fails in the market.
Yes.
Is it because of the faulty design of the survey, or is it because the customer preference changes as time goes on?
Now, there are many things which are involved there. Yes, the question is very relevant, especially in the case of marketing. Now, this is very important because there are many things which we have not taken into account, because business environment, one of the major, in business environment, the most important influencing factor is the environment, business environment. The launch of a product, of course, an organization launches a product, they must have done excellent studies, good research, and everything would have been done. But timing of the launch is also very, very important. Now, timing of the launch in the sense, like, in spite of everything being right, still the product fails. It could happen sometimes because your competitor also would have come out and brought a similar product, but with slightly better features. But they also must have identified the same problems, same things, but their product would have been more appealing. That happens sometimes, which probably sometimes me as, if I'm launching, I may not be able to gauge that from the environment. Second thing is that technological breakthroughs also happen very fast. That is, we speak in terms of technological environment. There are various organizations, some organizations which have failed miserably because there has been suddenly a technological improvement in the product. Mobile companies are the big example, because we see that, initial days we always found that Nokia and Motorola were the top leaders in this business. Suddenly we find somebody else taken over. So Samsung came into the market. Now from Samsung today we come to know that it is Xiaomi which is actually performing very well. Redmi and Xiaomi is performing very well. So what happens is suddenly the technological breakthroughs which happen. The second, one more important thing is that the obsolescence in the technology. So these two things also happen simultaneously. So when it comes to business environment, so there are many factors which play important role. So in spite of you doing the best of the research and coming to all these things, yes, sometimes people find fault with the research, saying that, yes, you were not able to gauge these developments of your competitors. So that can always be there. So having worked in a business firm, I know it very well. I can give you hundreds of excuses for the failure of my product, but my superiors will never agree to that. They'll always say, look, whatever you are saying is true, but as a researcher, you failed to gauge what your competitors were doing. Yes, on that front, definitely it was a failure on my part. I need to accept that. So, but per se, there is nothing wrong with my research on that particular product. But when it comes to research on the other parameters, I have failed miserably.
So
Have I answered,
you
sir?
should be also, so a person who is doing his market survey, management studies,
Yeah.
I think he should understand human behavior also.
Correct. Correct.
So there's a scope for lots of interdisciplinary research.
Definitely.
Human behavior,
Today,
commerce.
Today we have taken, now if you look into the research which is happening today, most of the studies which we see today are related to consumer behaviors, consumer psychology, and because in marketing, this area is a huge area, especially in business management marketing, the consumer psychology, consumer behavior are the very, very important, because my study itself is on the area of consumer behavior and consumer psychology. So everything, because every study in marketing is actually from human beings, from the consumers. So that's why for every study we have primary studies. We don't thrive on secondary literature, because human behavior also tends to change over a period of time. Today, whatever I have found from a study may not be true maybe 6 months down the lane. There are a lot of other things. So we need to constantly be in touch with the consumers to know what their taste, their preferences, what are the changes which has happened within them. And most second thing, these changes are influenced by various other factors. Economic factors play a very important role. Your environmental factors play a very important role. The general economic growth of the economic status of the country plays a very important role. So many things are there. So which all need to be, because that's why it's a very, we normally say, I don't know, because most of commerce teachers and management teachers would be knowing, we normally say case study approach is the best approach when it comes to learning management studies. And we start by giving examples of other subjects wherein case study method is employed. One is medical sciences, other one is legal studies. Now, what is unique in management studies is, even though case study methods are employed, the case study method which you have the way a particular case was addressed by one particular firm today may not, that formula may not hold for another company, maybe tomorrow. So this, because it is very dynamic in nature. Whereas medical sciences, whatever findings or whatever findings you have, product you have developed or findings you have come today, it is applicable for me tomorrow also for the next patient. Similarly, legal studies, you take precedents or quote various sections from whatever verdicts have been delivered. But in management sciences or management studies, see, because of its dynamic nature, because of its influence from various other environmental factors, you can't really come to a firm conclusion there. So these are some of that's something which is inbuilt in the management stream as well as in the business studies. And the same is applicable, I think, in the commerce stream also.
Okay,
Sir?
thank you, sir. So thank you, sir. So you are a great speaker and a great teacher, I think. So I could not disconnect. I was so attracted to to your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Sir, we have a question.
Yeah.
Sir, is there any chance for a research scholar to select the problem on his interest than the guide's interest, practically nowadays?
See, I would always suggest a research scholar's interest is of paramount importance, because a research scholar's passion is developed from his interest. It is, if my interest, I am thrusting upon you or a scholar, definitely there will be a certain amount of irritation. This is very common. So I always believe that it is important that the research scholar comes up with his own research problem, and thereby from that he develops a passion for, because when I have identified a problem, definitely I will have the urge to know the answer to that problem. If it is somebody else's problem, definitely the urge to know the answer to that problem will not be there. So ideally speaking, the research scholar will have to come out with their own problems, not somebody else's problem. Have I answered?
Yes, sir. Sure. Now we have another question. Can you please explain the verbal model? Is this model to be tested, or just how the variables are related to each other?
See, I'll tell you. See, when you do a literature survey or maybe literature study, you always have this is the most difficult part of research. Reading is the most difficult. And today, most of the researchers are unable to read and decipher or maybe understand that particular article thoroughly. Reading an article is a very, nowadays it becomes a very painstaking job for most of the researchers. You have to read. Now, and when I say you have to read articles, it is not the common articles which we find in some of the, journals which we publish from our some of the colleges and all. It is all journals, because it's not that I don't respect the journals which are produced from the colleges, but since today we have a system of identifying the best of the journals. And when it comes to my research areas, I always insist my research scholars to read articles from Scopus listed journals or Web of Science journals. Most of the journals would be Elsevier journals or something. Now, if you look at why I'm suggesting that is because a researcher should also know how to publish some of the good articles. Now, if you read some of these articles, it is very difficult to actually understand initially. I always say, yes, I know it very well that it's very difficult, but you will have to insist on reading these articles. Take some time, read those articles. But most importantly, what happens is while reading this article, you see that they follow a systematic step. A good article will always clearly spell out what was the problem which that researcher has addressed, what was the methodology that research scholar has used, what type of hypothesis he has stated or she has stated, what was the statistical techniques or tools which he has used. It also tells in the initial part itself the variables which have been taken for the study. So everything is there and everything is presented in a systematic manner. Now, by reading articles of that nature, what happens is a research scholar will also develop that aptitude, the aptitude of identifying these things systematically. So if you are able to read some 5 to 6 or maybe 10 initially articles of this nature, and then maintain a notebook and see, you first, while reading this, you identify the variables of the study. Problem once you have identified, you identify the variables of study. So these variables which you have studied, which you have identified, you take these variables, you discuss this with your supervisor. You discuss things with your peer groups. Now, most importantly, the research scholar derives a lot of courage. When he or she has identified these things, to speak to supervisors, to speak to peer groups, to go and meet experts. Please remember, otherwise the research scholar will never have the courage. Now, once the research scholar has read, understood, identified the articles, the research problem is there, the methodology he knows, he derives a lot of confidence and courage, and this enables him to go. And in doing this, after having identified these variables, he is only getting the final approval from his peer groups, from his supervisor. So identification of the variables is not a difficult task at all. All you need to do is, you need to actually read in a systematic manner, which again is lacking in most of the researchers. We don't read many articles. We only, straight away, starting from the problem to the objectives to everything, we go and approach the supervisor. And I'm telling you, research supervisors are not the right people to tell you all these things. Even if they tell you, I would say they would be telling maybe out of their own, from their interest areas and all. So it's always better that you develop the skill of identifying from reviews. That's the way it should be done. Is it okay?
Yeah, okay, sir.
Yeah.
Now, a question, sir, can you describe some important parametric tests used in context of testing hypothesis?
Now, again, I think I'm not going to delve into the statistical part, because again, it has to be dealt from the basics. Because I'll tell you, because you have got a session on by Professor Jake, I think some statistical session is going to be dealt by some of the other experts there. Because why I'm not dealing with that is, some of the candidates who are sitting, they may not be knowing the difference between what is a parametric and non-parametric test. So you will have to start from the basics of understanding your data. What is parametric? What are metric scales? What are not metric scales? All these things. So I don't want to confuse the party. Everybody are not in the same plane. I don't want to confuse these things here. So after having given some basic idea on all these things, it would be better to explain these things and all. Till then, it's better not to deal with some of the areas which others are not able to understand. So I would stop there. So I think anyway, the session is going to be dealt. So I don't want to confuse further. Is it okay?
Okay, sir. Okay.
Yeah. Because I'll tell you, because you need to start from the scratch. You need to understand what are metric scales, what are not metric scales. The metric scales are categorized into this, non-metric scales are categorized into this. All these things are important. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Dr.
Thank you.
Johnny, for your valuable
One more
presentation.
question, sir. One more question.
Yeah.
How to interrelate from diverse sources of data to answer your specific research problems? Please highlight.
Can you come back to the question?
How to interrelate from diverse sources of data?
I didn't understand your question. How to
Interrelate from, yeah, interrelate from diverse sources of data.
Now, first of all, come to what? Diverse sources of data. You said diverse sources of data. What are the diverse sources of data from where you're collecting? That is the first important thing. In social sciences, the basic sources of data, one is primary source and secondary source. Now, besides these two, what are the various diverse sources of data? I think you need to formulate your questions. Are you saying something to do with cross tabulation or something when it comes to analysis, or is it related to sources of data? Because sources of data, you have primary source and secondary source. Primary source is one which you directly collect from your respondents. Secondary source of data is from the manuals, from other things, maybe from also some literatures. All these come under secondary data. So, because there is no because whatever information you are seeking from primary source or secondary source, both this information are after having looked into your problem, you are trying to get this information. And secondary sources of data normally is collected from the secondary, in social sciences, secondary sources of data you collect, and from the secondary sources of data, you try to establish, using the secondary data, it is only adding up to the primary data source. These two data are not different things. These two data are normally the same thing. Only thing is that from secondary data, I'll give in simple terms, I'll tell you example. From somebody else's study which is published, I find that the behavior, see the social status of an individual, when it comes to marketing, social status of an individual plays an important role in the purchasing behavior. This is one thing which I've read and understood from a secondary source of data. Now in my study, I also take the same variables. I conduct a primary study. After having conducted a primary study, I may sometimes can come to us, I try to understand whether the status of a person really influence in his purchase behavior. In my study also, I find the same thing. Or sometimes I find the different thing. Then I try to, if it is a different thing, I try to understand why in my study it is different, why in the other person's study it is different. I look into who are the respondents, what is the nature of the respondents, in which socioeconomic status they belong, in which socioeconomic status the other researchers, consumers belong. So then I try to give some explanation or maybe discuss. So this is normally what happens. So interrelation means it is nothing but discussions about, that is my understanding. You need to discuss from various sources of data. After having processed, you discuss your findings with the findings of some other researcher from this, which you get from secondary sources of data. That is what you normally do. Is there anything beyond that? Is there any other question? Because I think there is some clarity which is required in the question which you have asked me.
Yes, sure, sir.
Okay, sir. Could you touch upon grounded theory and phenomenology with respect to social science research?
I think again that topic need not be discussed at this, because I am saying these are all. I think the audience are of various from various streams. Some are from social science, some are from commerce, some are from management. Now these are all the fundamentals of social sciences, because we start the social science theories from there. So again, I don't think I need to discuss these things here at this point of time, because then we'll have to be totally devoted only to social science theories, from there the funnel approach, from there the grounded approach, all these things would come from there. So I don't think this is the right forum to discuss these things and all, because many may not be able to follow.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Johnny Johnson, sir, for your valuable presentation. That was indeed fruitful and informative, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I thank all the organizers. Thank you very much. I've got a special thanks to Professor Nasser, who has, I think he's there very much. He has been keenly watching and listening to me also, I believe. And I'm really impressed by his initial talk which he has given me. So thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Rajiv, the principal of the college, the manager, and all the participants who have attended this particular program. Thank you very much.